Hello and welcome to my series of conversations with men and women whose ideas, vision and philosophy help define our contemporary world. My guest today was recently awarded the Padma Bhushan as a gesture of celebration, of applause for her deep, passionate commitment to the downtrodden, the underprivileged, the disenfranchised across India and the world. The primary focus, of course, of her work has been women, gender justice, gender equality, and working for the cause of women's rights in a holistic, total manner. She heads the Guild of Service, which she founded, which has reached out and touched more than 40 million people, addressing a host of issues and problems and predicaments of women in the urban and rural areas across the country. She was a founder of an organization that looks at war widows. She has been a former chairperson of the National Commission of Women, has been awarded 7 honorary doctorates, and so I could go on. But I'm delighted to welcome, meanwhile, Dr. V. Mohini Giri. You have been a passionate voice and a passionate activist on a whole range of causes and issues, in particular those related to women and gender. What has been the most agonizing, the most anguishing predicament of women that you have felt confronted by?
Their widowhood. That has been the most anguishing that I have confronted. Whether she's young or old, whether she's a war widow or an earthquake widow or any other kind, riot widow, I have found that that is the most traumatizing experience of my life and her life, because it's so sudden. The suddenness of the whole thing is really, it leaves her totally, absolutely without any help, and that is what really touches me the most.
What kind of numbers are we looking at here? Do you have a sense of,
in India there are about 42 million widows. Every 4th household has got a widow, and 11% of the women's population is widowed. And let me tell you, whether they are rich or poor, or whether they are absolutely religious widows like in Vrindavan, they all have an identity of their own. But when they become a widow, it becomes totally zero and they are lost. So that is the most agonizing moment, when from all that power, from all the having children, having being a matriarch of the family, having possession of all the things that are going on in the family, she is left without anything, and that is really agonizing.
This calls for many layers of intervention and many layers of processes that may ultimately impact this, but basically it calls for a kind of social engineering.
It does, it does.
Which is extremely difficult and complex
It is complex because it's patriarchy. We are still living in a patriarchal society, and till such time that we decide that we are going to share power equally, men and women both, that reduces patriarchy naturally by itself. Till that time, I don't think that that kind of a social engineering can be done till that mindset changes.
But changing mindsets is not easy.
No, not
and
easy
I think
at all.
that in India we have often looked at legislative solutions to these things. We pass bills, we look at women's rights, and we think that is ultimately going to make an impact. But what kind of impact have legislations such as those had?
Very little. There was a legislation for sati, which really had very little impact, although now it's totally perhaps gone from the map. But dowry hasn't yet gone. Female feticide and infanticide have not yet vanished. These are the things that will only go if you change the very idea right from the beginning of the birth of a boy. And the mother has a big role to play in it, because she herself is engineering whatever is being taught to the child, so she will have to change it too. So she has to also change her mindset. I don't relegate it only to men that they have to change their mindset, that women also need to change their mindsets in order to bring up their families that way. Then only we will be able to change that kind of a thing.
But then would you sort of feel that much of your work, to use a horrible phrase, is sort of like Band-Aid? You look at so much, you've been doing so many projects, so much work, reaching out to people, helping them through their processes to adopt and adjust. But what you really seem to be saying is that until that mindset changes.
Well, that's the ultimate. But in the meantime, those who have been touched by it, you can change their lives by giving them skills, by empowering them through education, by empowering them through health needs, health benefits. These are the things that are really empowering. So all that we can do at the present moment is to say, when a woman can say, I have no fear, and that to my mind is empowerment. And we can only take a woman up to that junction when she says, I have no fear. But by doing that, we are not changing a whole society, we are not changing the framework of the total society. That will need a different kind of a setup.
What kind of setup? What kind of process? Well, because ultimately that is the aspiration.
Yes.
And it's only once in, I don't know what, in hundreds of years perhaps, that Mahatma Gandhi or
Raja Ram Mohan
Roy or Swami Vivekananda, whoever, comes out and begins to make that kind of impact beyond, as I said, beyond rules, regulations, and just pure governance.
And that is what is needed. That kind of a thing, that kind of a revolution that has to come into society. It will come slowly and steadily with education. It will come slowly and steadily with laws also. A combination of all. There has to be a paradigm shift, totally. From what we are doing now to what we have to do next. We have to start treating them as equals, we have to start treating them as human beings, and when we start doing that, that kind of a shift will come. I am sure it will come, it's not long, we are only 60 years from independence today, and it will come through slowly and steadily now. Even the women whom we have been working with, whether it's in Kashmir or in Vrindavan or in Godhra, we see a kind of a change, not only among themselves, but in the surroundings that they go to. Now they are accepting group marriages of people. Now they are even accepting that the Nikah Nama should be read in a certain way, which we say is the right thing. So there are certain changes, but it's such a small drop in the ocean. This has to be throughout the length and breadth of the country. It's a huge population, and whatever you do, we can only touch that much, not beyond that.
What would you say have been some of the most decisive, persuasive interventions? The Panchayati Raj and the role of women in Panchayati Raj, for example?
Panchayati Raj has been one of the milestones of Indian history, really, because I am absolutely sold to it. When I go and see my little daughters in Karnataka or Tamil Nadu or Andhra, I feel that these girls are really more capable, much more capable than me or you or anyone else put together. They are making speeches, they are making decisions, they know where to dig a tube well, they know where the cremation ground should be. These are just things from common sense that they are doing. And even the self-help groups that they are bringing about is something, they are bringing about a change. The Panchayat Raj has been a great agent of change in India. Likewise, if we get 33% in the parliament, I am sure the women's perspective is quite different. And we could perhaps present through the parliament also a different whole kind of new ideas into the parliament, whereby we could reform many of our laws, reform many of the ideas, bring in health inputs to people. Many of the other things can be reformed. So I am hoping that that kind of a input from women would also be there in the parliament.
Staying with the Panchayati Raj,
right.
The popular perception is that there might have been sort of occasional islands of excellence where women in that role of heading their panchayats have been able to be assertive and make an impact. But by and large, they're still dominated by their husbands. Husbands are reluctant to even leave their wives alone to attend a meeting and will sit outside and keep an eye on them. They are surrogate
well,
leaders.
In the southern states, in fact, what you are saying, that would be an island. Husbands coming, that's a rare thing in the southern states. But in northern states, of course, Rajasthan has improved a lot in the recent past. But in perhaps Bihar and UP and Madhya Pradesh, it's a little bit like that. But things are changing very fast, as I have told you. Even in Orissa, there's a sea change. So I cannot generalize and say that people are still, the husbands are pushing the women from behind to do things. It's not true. Women have come onto their own. The training programs have been absolutely A1. They are coming out for training, even with their little kids they come out, they take this training, there's leadership training in them, and they are coming out. It's a very heartening thing when you see them, 800,000 women together and voicing their feelings and telling you what exactly they want to do. It is a change, it's a big change. The other big change that has really touched us in the recent past is also girls started going to schools. It is not, we can't see it. Of course, we still keep on saying where are the schools, where are the buildings, where are the teachers, which is true to a large extent. But there is a little change, there is a certain change, and children, girls have started going to school and they are becoming assertive. You see more girls in villages having a beauty parlor of their own, you see, which was never thought about.
But do you think that's a good thing?
Why not? Every girl wants to look beautiful. Why shouldn't she look beautiful? Every woman wants to look the best. And if something can make her look even better, then why not? I see no objection in it. If a woman desires that she should be looking more, and there's something that can perhaps help towards that, it's fine by me. And that's an occupation that is going around. And it's a good sign, that it's a sign of progress. It's a sign of progress to say, a woman says that I want to look my best. I'm no longer in that parda where men are prohibited to see me. Let them see me, and I'm good looking, I'm confident, I'm okay.
You're watching a conversation with Dr. V. Mohini Giri, women's activist, upholder of lost causes in some senses. We'll be right back after a short break. Don't go away. Welcome back to a continuing conversation with Dr. V. Mohini Giri, who recently won the Padma Bhushan and runs the Guild of Service that reaches out to more than 40 million people across India, largely women. We were talking about beauty parlors. I've seen you on television, on many programs. In some ways, mourning the loss of values, the trivialization of women, the objectification of women.
True.
So, isn't there? The only reason I asked you that question because implicit in the beauty parlor culture is many of those dimensions.
Well, there are 2 points, 2 sides to the whole thing. When you take a woman and put her in a consumer movement or a consumerist culture, that is quite different. When a woman is just, even in the olden days, a woman would oil her hair, she would perhaps put flowers in her hair, and that was a kind of a beauty culture too. Why are we not seeing it with those eyes? Why should we see it with the eyes of something which is vulgar? It has nothing to do with vulgarity, or it has nothing to do with the consumer movement, which is making these things into a taboo kind of a thing. I am saying it's all right for a woman to take the aid of whatever is necessary to make herself look as good as possible. Just like men perhaps like to do things also, women also have the right to do things which they would like. In olden days, it would be kohl, the kajal, it will be the flowers in her hair, it would be some tika of a different kind. Today, the concept has changed a little bit to perhaps a little lipstick, perhaps a little more of those things. So, it's okay. Perhaps her fingers are all manicured. It's okay if her fingers are nice and clean. I don't have any objections to that, and I find my girls in the villages very nice and smart. It looks good to see them groomed well. I'll call it groomed well, which is a nice thing.
I notice you say, my girls. What kind of relationship do you have?
Yeah, I have a mother's relationship. All of them call me Ma. In all the homes, I'm called Ma. And I feel like a grandmother or a mother to them because they are my children. My children of my country are my children. And I feel very nice and happy to be with them. I feel that perhaps I'm also learning from them. They are also learning from me. It's a give and take situation with all of them. And I feel happy to be with them.
You were talking about the Women's Reservation Bill in Parliament.
Yes.
And in some sense, it's been discussed and argued to threads and shredded. Everybody seems to say they want it, and yet nobody really does enough to make it happen. And I think it is also somewhere lost in the larger framework of the discourse and the confusion and the chaos on the very notion of affirmative action, that most people believe in some form of affirmative action, or at least intellectually would want to acknowledge that, and would be sort of reluctant to say they don't believe in any form of affirmative action. And yet we've got this sort of completely chaotic melting pot on OBCs and CBCs and women's reservation and reservation for the upper caste and lower caste and middle caste or whatever. What is your solution? Forget just the gender aspect of it, but what would be your ideal blueprint, your take on affirmative action?
Actually, why the bill has not come through is, there's only just one thing, is that it's the male insecurity. The men feel insecure. How can they lose 181 seats in the parliament, which is a big thing for them? It's like their property. They have been there since ages and ages, and to get that up is a very difficult task for them. So they're not even wanting to get that bill down into the parliament. My whole thing is that why if we can be good housewives, we can be good corporate managers, we can be good at anything else also, why aren't we considered good in the parliament too? We are. Nobody has experimented. Let them experiment with us. We are, and why can't we even be the president of this country? Sure we can. So, what is really preventing all this is the insecurity that is among men. That's point number one. Point number two, I think that most men, like I won't name, someone recently told me, where are the women? And then they ask you that women are dangerous. So, these are the kind of reactions come from men, from half the population which has been subjugating us all these years. So, I think these fears have to be taken out, and women now will have to make up their minds that if not by affirmative action, then even by merit they must go there somehow or the other. We must have more and more women contesting those elections.
But locating this in the larger discourse of affirmative action, not just affirmative action as relates to gender, but you know, caste,
yes,
and the whole range of issues that have come up, because you know, one of the deterrents is that okay, you have affirmative action for gender, then you have affirmative action for 100 different categories,
yes, reservation inside reservation.
And so how do you make this work?
See, many of the affirmative actions that we have taken so far have been too long in time. We should have a review committee also. We should see periodically how we are doing about it, and then also take back what is already done. I mean, you can't go on sitting on affirmative action for ages and ages together. There has to be some kind of a review for everything. Likewise, I am saying, give an opportunity to women this time also, review it. See what is happening, and review it with the side, what is the men's performance in the parliament vis-a-vis the women. Don't review it by itself alone, but see also, has the performance of men been like this? So, why are we only judging the women? So, I would say that some kind of a review mechanism has to be in place, where we see all these affirmative actions, whether they have been really successful or not successful, and if not successful, what can be done about it.
What would be your sort of larger blueprint? You're in public life in one sense at least, that you engage in so much social activism. You're visible, you're listened to. What would be your blueprint for affirmative action? Of course, you review what has worked and what hasn't worked,
yes,
and that
yes,
makes logical sense. But the issue keeps coming up: an economic criteria, historical basis. Gender is something else that's come in. What would be the kind of balance? What would you say?
As far as the 33% for women in the parliament was concerned, our viewpoint at that time and today is that treat women as women, do not disintegrate them, do not take them into caste bits, just give them reservation, whoever she is. As long as she is a woman, please try her out once, and don't disintegrate into anything else. And then as far as other affirmative actions are concerned, that is to be reviewed, because that has been there already for a long time.
We've been looking at a whole range of issues that look at gender, and you said that the most despairing one for you is really those of women who have been widowed. What are the mechanisms? It's something that I constantly struggle with, that we see injustice and we see that this is the consequence of social prejudices and beliefs, and many of these are governed by issues of faith.
Yes.
And we are very sort of somewhat reluctant to cross the line into faith, because we believe we are obliged to have a deeply secular philosophy commitment, which says we must respect diversity and we must respect points of view or aspects of religion, other religions, even if we don't agree with it.
Yes, true.
You have taken a somewhat contrarian view. You have had the courage to stand up and look at different religions and say, no, I mean, religion, Islam doesn't sanction talaq in the way that it does.
It doesn't.
The Hindu approach to the predicament of widows is not real tradition and real faith. What have been the challenges and the perils of doing this?
Well, I have not had much opposition from the Muslim world, whether it be in Godhra, Gujarat, where I worked with them, or in Kashmir, where I am working with them, because what I am speaking really is truly from what Islam says. Islam, in fact, has respected widowhood, and Prophet Muhammad himself married a widow. So the question of widows, subjugation or stigma on widowhood is not there in the religion at all. So is the case with Hinduism. Nowhere does a Hindu philosophy or Hindu Gita, Bhagavad Gita or whatever has ever said that a woman whose husband is gone cannot remarry, or she has to follow a certain dress code. It's not there at all. So somebody has to speak about it. Of course, I go to religious leaders often and I tell them that why don't you speak about it in your speeches? That's one way of changing the mindset. So they are doing it slowly and steadily. Of course, they're also afraid. But when I did this in Vrindavan, then of course the public did not like it too much. I was criticized. I took a few women on the stage, made them wear colored clothes, wear a bindi and wear all the kinds of things that a widow is not supposed to do, and there was an objection to that. But slowly and steadily I think people have accepted my way of thinking and they don't say anything anymore. I just stood by it, that's all. So now I don't have any criticism against me. I'm happy about that. And even in the Nikah Nama, I did a mass wedding of 28 girls of Godhra victims' riots. And even in the Nikah Nama, when we had read out that Meher Rakam has to be given and all those things with a modified Nikah Nama, people agreed to it. There was no discrepancy.
Ironically, the problem with issues of faith is that you will always find somebody who can find some section of some scripture to uphold their point of view. So ultimately, somewhere we approach this, or we need to approach this from a liberal humanist perspective or a point of view.
True, always.
And to transcend the narrow interpretations of this. And in that context, what is your personal philosophy? What is your personal faith?
When I interact with these ladies, many of them, I always address, tell them, look into my eyes, do you find a mother in me? If you find a mother in me, that's what your religion is, and that's what my religion is. That's all. It's between mother and a daughter. So please will you treat me like that, because that's how in the beginning many of the Muslim community women would look at me with doubt, and that's all I had to say to them, and they would look at me and they had faith in me. And with that faith they are now living in my ashrams, living in my homes, and I don't have any difficulty dealing with any of those women there. So I have not touched religion at all. I have just touched a human angle. I have touched a mother-daughter relationship. I have said to them that your relationship to me is as good as that. So that's how I deal with most of them.
You commented earlier in the program about how that this predicament was not of widowhood, but let's look at the larger exploitation of women. Was not something that was just restricted to the poor, but even amongst wealthy families.
Sure.
The popular perception is that it is women who are disadvantaged economically who suffer the most. Yet we also know that women, even though they are from wealthy families, may have had the privilege of education, don't always find the courage, don't always find the self-confidence to assert themselves and their identities. And they're frequently dependent on a male enabling or encouraging them to do so.
Very right, very rightly put. That is what is happening now. It's their dependence on the male, and the laws are all flawed laws. We have to now even see to the laws of how much help, and then the women do not get speedy justice. And in the absence of that speedy justice, women are even reluctant to go to law, where the cases drag on for such a long time, and where again and again she has to depend on that male member to take her to the court, to get a lawyer, many other things that she has to depend. So if we can do away with all these things, then the life for a woman, whether she is rich or poor, will be much easier. Because today a woman who has to get a divorce, she has to, at the age of 18, supposing she doesn't want a husband, and she has to put a case in the court, it will take her another 20 years. By the time she is 40, she may not be wanting to marry at all. And so many years have gone. In the meantime, she has sold her bangles, her earrings and everything in order to fight that court case. She doesn't have any monetary support also.
What are some of the more subtle forms of exploitation that you feel are particularly wrenching? Because as an activist, you're naturally obliged, to intervene and help the more extreme cases. But I think the form of the injustice and the traumas of being a woman in some ways are at many levels and many layers.
Sure, it's the mental trauma, whether it be in the bedroom or the boardroom. Whichever it is, it's a mental trauma that a woman suffers, and she's taunted at every step, wherever she is. As I said, from bedroom to boardroom. I mean, whatever work she does, it's not appreciated, and it's not really hurting her physically, or it's not touching her doing anything like that, but it's just hurting her mind.
Yet you have been a woman who has broken the shackles and has reached out and has impacted so many millions of people.
It's a different upbringing, I suppose, where you are in a liberal family, your father respects you, your mother respects you, and then your brothers are there who think that you're equal. And so my breeding might have been a little different from the generalized that is going on here. But generally, but even I'm afraid of society. Even when I go out somewhere, perhaps to a puja or somewhere, many people come up and tell me, Mrs. Giri, do you mind going into the other room because it's auspicious hour for the muhurtam and you cannot be here, you're a widow.
So what do you say and what do you do?
No, of course, I create a huge hue and cry. I say, why did you invite me? I have come dressed up to attend this function and I must be here. That's it. So people, of course, are afraid that this widow will be there at the time of good muhurtam and all that. But it happens in every family. It happens every day. So these are the things, barriers that we'll have to cross very slowly. Now, the women in Vrindavan even are doing the cremation rites because the men there refuse to even cremate a woman who's a widow.
So was this process of your flowering, in a sense, and of course, you came from a distinguished family who were literary, who were interested in music. You were daughter-in-law of a great activist, the wife of someone who was sensitive to these issues and nuances. But was there a sort of a breakthrough moment, a breakthrough incident that you said, well, this is enough, and now I have to step out and do my bit for the world?
Well, there were two things. I was greatly influenced by Swami Shivananda in Rishikesh, and he was a mentor. He taught me many things. He was an eye surgeon, and at that time I saw the service was really beyond everything. It's whatever you do, but service to human beings is really God. He taught me that. I got it from him. And then my mother was a widow when I was 9 years old, and I saw her struggle throughout her life. Struggle economically, raising 7 children and all those things. And I think it did affect me at that time, and I must have made up my mind somewhere there at that particular juncture that I won't let this happen to women.
Have you ever had sort of moments of self-doubt?
No, I don't doubt myself ever. Sky is the limit, you can get everything. There's nothing impossible.
And so where is the sky for you? Where is that sort of, the aspiration?
My sky will be when women are really equal partners to men. My sky will be when they will be truly representing the country in every way. My sky will be when all the women are going to schools and colleges. That will be my day.
Dr. Mohini Giri, I hope we can fly there, all of us together, up there in the skies. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Rajiv.
Thank you. You're wonderful.
Thank you.